Hello, I'm Matt Galloway, and this is the Current Podcast.
The situation is really dramatically deteriorating in Gaza now. Everyone is facing starvation now. I mean, acute hunger. I mean, it's not among only the population who are we see in the hospitals. No, it's among our staff as well. The medical staff, the paramedics, everyone is really facing the same situation.
That's Dr. Mohammed Abu Muhaisib, the Deputy Medical Coordinator for the aid organization MSF in Gaza. He says he's working, trying to provide medical care for his patients, while sometimes only eating a meal every 2 days. The Integrated Food Security Phase Classification, or IPC, a UN-backed global hunger monitor, says that mounting evidence shows widespread starvation, malnutrition, and disease are driving a rise in hunger-related deaths, noting that 1 in 3 people had gone without food for days at a time. Yusra Abu Sharek works with another aid organization, Inara, in Gaza City. She is also a mother who is struggling to feed her own children.
Just this morning, I cut off a damaged part of the bread we have that got damaged due to the moisture. We don't have electricity. And while I was doing that, my 12-year-old son was saying, "Hey, Mom, we are dying of hunger." So this word killed me, like while I was hearing it, but it's nothing compared to others who are suffering in that sense, mothers who are struggling to secure the very basics of their babies' needs, like baby formula and diapers.
The UN and aid organizations accuse Israel of obstructing the delivery of food, water, and medicine. Israel has denied being responsible for the shortage of aid, accusing Hamas of funneling aid away from those who need it. Over the weekend, Israel resumed some airdrops of food and says it will open up humanitarian corridors in the days ahead. All of this is unfolding as leaders from around the world meet at the United Nations for a conference on a two-state solution. Khaled El-Gindi is a visiting scholar at Georgetown University's Center for Contemporary Arab Studies. He served as an advisor to the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah on permanent status negotiations with Israel from 2004 to 2009. Good morning.
Good morning.
What are you hearing from friends and contacts in Gaza about how much of a difference these airdrops that we have seen so far, and it seems a limited number of trucks are making? What difference are they making?
Yeah, I mean, what I'm hearing from friends and colleagues in Gaza is pretty much the same as we just heard in your opening report. Everyone I know, literally every person I know in Gaza is hungry. Statistically, about a third of Gaza's 2.3 million people have gone several days without eating anything. And that, what I'm seeing from starvation from experts is that they've reached the threshold of famine. So it's quite terrible. The number of trucks, as you indicated, the airdrops, this is really a trickle. This is a drop in the ocean of what is actually needed. And at the very same time, there are more than 6,000 trucks lined up at Gaza's borders ready to come in and be distributed across the Gaza Strip. And yet Israel is blocking that.
And of course, Israel, the foreign minister saying today that they are facilitating the entrance of aid, but aid groups saying that is not the case. That is not the experience that they are having at the border. When we look at the reaction of some of these groups that are hoping to provide aid, agencies that are monitoring this, like the World Health Organization, a phrase that comes up over and over is man-made starvation.
Yeah.
What do you believe the international community could have done to prevent us from finding ourselves here?
Oh, there's quite a lot it could have done. I mean, and also it's important to remember this is not new. We've been talking. I went back and did some research, and the first time that aid organizations and humanitarian groups began talking about Israel using starvation as a weapon was in late 2023. We've seen different periods of restrictions. There's loosening, there's a tightening. There's always been a surge after the temporary ceasefires. There's been a surge in humanitarian aid. So we know absolutely that Israel controls, it can turn the tap on or off at any moment, and it does so. And they told us, in fact, in March that they were cutting off all food from entering. There has been a very limited amount entering since then. But we've gone from something like 400 distribution sites across the Gaza Strip when the UN was delivering aid to 4. So of course, it's totally inadequate. So I think it's important to remember that it's not only man-made, but it is a function of Israeli policy to produce this kind of catastrophic mass starvation.
Now, at the time, you talk about what was happening in March, April, May. The Israeli government talked about, at that moment, putting pressure on Hamas. Benjamin Netanyahu has spoken just recently, on Sunday, in fact, about the situation in Gaza, and I'd like us to listen to a bit of what he had to say.
Israel is presented as though we are applying a campaign of starvation in Gaza. What a bold-faced lie. There is no policy of starvation in Gaza, and there is no starvation in Gaza.
Israel's closest ally, the United States. We've even seen President Donald Trump saying that there is, quote, real starvation in Gaza. I wonder what you make of how all of that is playing out.
Yeah, I mean, look, this isn't the first time Prime Minister Netanyahu has, let's say, deviated from the truth. But it is telling when his closest ally, President Trump, who's been otherwise pretty indifferent to Palestinian suffering in Gaza, has to come out and say, yes, it's real. Of course, the president is seeing the same images and reading the same news that we're seeing, but he also gets special intelligence briefings. He knows exactly the state of humanitarian conditions in Gaza. So it is sadly, I'm afraid to say, a bold-faced lie when the Prime Minister of Israel says that.
The worsening humanitarian crisis has provoked, in some cases, stronger language from world leaders. Certainly, we see what is happening with France. Keir Starmer in the UK has called a cabinet meeting today to talk about a peace plan for Gaza. But when we see, with Canada in particular, Prime Minister Mark Carney saying that Israel's denial of aid into Gaza is, quote, a violation of international law. To what extent does that sharpened language affect the situation on the ground?
I think it affects it in very limited ways. And so we saw in the last week to 10 days where there was an enormous outcry over the images. We saw a surge in the number of deaths of children, especially, who were dying of hunger. And so there was enormous pressure, most of it behind the scenes. There was a lot of anger directed at Israel, and Israel responded by allowing something like a few dozen trucks to enter, and then we saw the airdrops over the last few days. But again, this is a tiny drop of what is actually needed. And so Prime Minister Netanyahu especially has become very adept at managing world anger. If you remember, a year ago, President Biden was expressing the same frustration. You need to allow in more aid. You need to limit civilian casualties. You need to do more to protect civilians. So the international community has been expressing outrage for a very, very long time. And this has gone on for now almost 2 years. But as long as there are no consequences, if it's just angry words, well, then the Israeli leadership is perfectly fine. They can absorb that bad PR, release some pressure on them by allowing some aid and buying them some more time. This has now dragged on for almost 2 years. Unless there are consequences, countries like Canada and the UK and European states have to impose some kind of sanction, or else Israel will just continue to do what it's doing. And this will go on indefinitely.
I'd like to talk about another part of the backdrop to all of this, which is the conference that's being held at the United Nations right now in New York, conversation about a two-state solution. Emmanuel Macron saying that France is ready to recognize a Palestinian state in September. What do you make of that happening at this moment and the extent to which that is a possible positive step forward for Gazans?
Well, I mean, I think it's a positive step forward for the international community, which is desperately trying to rescue whatever may be left of a two-state solution. Because in addition to the mass starvation and annihilation in Gaza, we see violence, settlements in the West Bank are expanding. We see, eating up Israeli settlers and the army eating up Palestinian land, thousands being displaced in the West Bank. So this is an attempt to save a two-state solution as a theoretical, diplomatic outcome in some point in the future. But it doesn't directly deal with the disastrous situation in Gaza. And I think that's what's needed. I think it would have been far more effective to put together an international conference that addresses, for example, the International Court of Justice. It has issued 3 different sets of provisional declarations, provisional measures that need to be taken both by Israel and the international community to prevent the risk of a genocide. We've seen that completely ignored. So if the international community would come together to say, how do we save lives in Gaza? How do we break the blockade that Israel has imposed? That would be, I think, far more effective than symbolic gestures toward a theoretical two-state solution.
Okay. Appreciate your time and this conversation today. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Khaled El-Guindi is a visiting scholar at Georgetown University's Center for Contemporary Arab Studies.
We've always supported, and we continue to support, a two-state solution with a free and viable Palestine living in peace and side by side in peace and security with Israel.
Prime Minister Mark Carney yesterday reaffirming his commitment to a two-state solution, but as France announced its plans to recognize Palestinian statehood last weekend, Carney has not indicated that his government is ready to follow suit. Lloyd Axworthy is the chair of the World Refugee and Migration Council and a former Minister of Foreign Affairs under Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Good morning, Lloyd Axworthy.
Oh, good morning, Catherine.
We heard the Prime Minister there reaffirming his support for a two-state solution, but he was also very clear that any future Palestinian state could not include Hamas in any role. How likely do you think it is that Canada will follow in France's footsteps in recognizing Palestinian statehood?
Well, I think it's a crunch time for Canadian policy. I think we have to give credit to the Prime Minister. He is tough on the stance that Canada's taken for so long. We've been sort of straddling the issue, and now it's made very clear that the humanitarian crisis is just unacceptable, and that a two-state solution has to be an end objective. But again, as your previous speaker said, those are words. How do you translate it into action? And Prime Minister Carney will be invited to a summit of world leaders in September at the United Nations to deal directly with the issues in Gaza. And at that time, I think the first indication that we are understanding just the degree of violence and calamity that's going on and needs a much tougher set of more robust set of actions. And that's the key word. It's action, not words. And we will have 6 or 8 weeks to, as Canadians, to make our voices known about what we want the government to do.
And I wonder what your sense is of the extent to which the government is prepared to take action and not just have this be about words. I mean, we did see a strongly worded statement last week that Canada signed along with 25 other Western nations. But where do you think Mark Carney stands on action?
Well, I think so far he has been fairly direct in saying identifying the issue and properly pointing fingers to the fact that you have an extremist right-wing government in Israel that's driving the point. Catherine, I think one thing that we have to understand that the Israeli actions are derived from a commitment of that group to basically have a form of ethnic cleansing, to eliminate Palestinians from Gaza and the West Bank so they can have a greater Israel. That's the stated comments of some of the finance minister and the foreign minister and the defense minister. So we know that this is a total contravention of international law and every agreement. And that's where I think Canada has to become a far more vocal, far more direct in terms of insisting that that international laws and international institutions like the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, which Canada has played a major role in creating, are lived up to and become sort of a key center of what our efforts will be at the UN summit.
Yeah, and Israel has, of course, vociferously denied allegations of ethnic cleansing and genocide throughout this conversation. I want to talk a little bit in this idea of action, Lloyd Axworthy, about something that happened yesterday. At this UN conference, Canada's Foreign Affairs Minister, Anita Anand, announced that Canada would be putting forward an additional $10 million for capacity building and reform in the Palestinian Authority. So, in essence, trying to fund a governance setup that would not include Hamas. How significant is that move?
Well, any step forward is a good move, but it's certainly it doesn't really address the central issue that for some kind of stability eventually to occur, there has to be a new set of governance in Gaza, in the Palestinian regions. And right now, the Palestinian Authority is not only weak, but it doesn't have a lot of credibility. I think that we should be putting more emphasis on what we can do to bring about a changeover and a transition. Let's begin, Catherine, with peacekeeping. There was I keep thinking, over 70 years ago, Lester Pearson initiated the United Nations emergency force in the Suez that really helped the conflict to stop. And that gave us a real sort of reputation and a following that Canada was a peacekeeper.
Are you suggesting Canadian troops, Canadian peacekeepers then in Gaza, Lloyd Axworthy?
I think we should start training them. I think we should. It doesn't have to be the same kind of boots on the ground, but these are very complex developments. It takes logistics.
Pardon me, sorry, but if not boots on the ground, then what? Because I think that would be a very important question for Canadians.
To coordinate a major effort will take things like better communications, logistics, training, and particularly, I believe that it's time for the UN and its supporters like Canada to look at implementing the powers of the Trusteeship Council, which was used to help colonial countries as they advance into democracies to set up effective government systems. The Trusteeship Council has equal standing in the Security Council, and yet it's not being used. I think that's where we need some creative diplomacy, along with the fact that I think Canada can be much stronger in terms of the illegality that's going on, the breaking of international laws and norms, because we've had such an important part. And thirdly, I think that we can be a much more active diplomatically if the signal is given from the top, and I think that really requires the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister and the government as a whole to embrace the issue of the calamity of Gaza and the starvation that's going on.
We have to leave the conversation there. We're out of time, but I appreciate your time today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine.
Lloyd Axworthy is the chair of the World Refugee and Migration Council and a former Minister of Foreign Affairs under Prime Minister Jean Chrétien.
You've been listening to The Current Podcast. My name is Matt Galloway. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.